Hello and welcome back to another MGTOW Talks. Although this time I'm not here with a man, I'm here with GirlWritesWhat. Although I suppose some people might characterize her at least partly as a man. Genitals notwithstanding,
Honorary man.
honorary man, something like that. And I thought it would be good opportunity for the audience or the subscribers just to discuss some confusion or maybe clarify certain things and maybe some related issues related to men going their own way and traditionalism and what have you. Now, some of this has been brought about by this really long thread of comments on, I believe it was Razorblade Candy's part five of why the men's rights movement fail. I couldn't honestly sift through all 500 so comments or however many there were. So I think this is a good opportunity to talk to GirlWritesWhat about what her position actually is in regards to traditionalism and men going their own way. Now, before I actually ask, my understanding is that you think men going their own way are are highly anomalous in the sense that most men aren't going to do that. Yes.
I think most men can't be convinced to do it in a conscious way.
Hmm.
I don't think that most men will abandon women or completely give up sort of the gynocentric aspect. I think that's sort of bred into both men and women's natures, and so I just don't. There's a couple of reasons too that I don't think it's feasible to essentially have men and women just go their own ways. I also think that society's not going to let you, and it's not going to matter what kind of society it is. Um, Women's liberation, there's this sort of illusion that it brought prosperity. Somebody in some comment section just the other day said, because we have double the workforce, one of these countries that uses traditionalism can't compete with us economically. But no, the whole reason that we feel like it's an illusion of solvency, it's an illusion of economic solvency. And so it wasn't just technology and it wasn't just industrialization that allowed women to be liberated in their false liberation. It's also federal reserves that can magic money out of thin air, and the willingness of people to um, have their grandchildren shoulder hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt per child before they're even born to fund all this. So we it's a luxury item. Feminism is a luxury item we think we can afford, but we can't. Right now, you go and liberate men. That illusion of solvency. We're making minimum payments on that bill right now, right? And we're not going to be able to make the minimum payments. That's just what's going to happen. So society's not going to let you guys all go your own way. Something's going to break, something's going to give. So that's pretty much my position on all of that, just how feasible that is,
Hmm.
to have men sort of en masse, you
But
know
there was also a bit of confusion as to. I think this has been a mischaracterization, but I think a lot of people have an idea that you're actually endorsing traditionalism rather than just offering a description. I mean, basically, as far as I understand, your position is that, you know, traditionalism, feminism, yes, two sides of the same coin, but at least men get respect in the traditionalist model,
well,
right?
and they get respect, and they get like at least part ownership of their children. They get a say in what society looks like or what their families are going to look like, as far as they get, because we're not looking at the traditionalism of the 50s,
Hmm.
right? The traditionalism of the 50s is a post-feminist, post-technological traditionalism.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the rhetoric around sort of women getting a free ride in traditionalism is just, if if you go back 50 more years, nobody was getting a free ride. We were putting 3-year-old kids in fields to pick cotton for 10
Yeah.
hours a day during harvest season, right? So nobody got a free ride back then. Everybody was more disposable than I think even men are these days, including children. And so you sort of look at it. You can't really look at the 50s as the archetype for that way of life. And there have been MGTOW all through history, right? There have been men who went their own way because they chose and they didn't want to live that life. And you sort of find more and more of them deciding to do that whenever feminism sort of rears its ugly head, like at the sort of the mid Byzantine era. That was when things started to when men started to say, well, she's got some rights now. Why am I getting married? She can own a business. She can look after herself,
Hmm.
right? So it's sort of a like if people don't think women were working back then, um, that they were just kind of sitting around eating bonbons. If my grandmother was still alive, they could talk to her. Because she quit school. The last time she attended school regularly was in grade 3, and then she went sporadically, but most of the time she was at home helping work on the farm and helping to raise her younger siblings.
Well, I mean, the reality is only the upper class women had any luxury as to not really doing a whole lot. Everyone, which was a small minority, I mean,
Mhm.
throughout history, there was a division of labor,
And
and
everybody worked.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
everyone did something. But I mean, I think it's one thing that's clear is that we were, barring some sort of civilizational collapse, we're not going back to that anytime soon.
I don't think that it's possible to go back to demanding those things of women or men. I don't think it's gonna, like, unless we have a civilization collapse, unless we have a technological collapse or something like that, an EMP or whatever. We're not going to be put in a position uh, where those things are going to be seen as necessary enough to kind of impose them on people. And so I'm not quite sure where all the excitement is coming from, because even if I was fully in favor of traditionalism, even if I thought it was like a perfectly equitable system, um, it's not coming back,
Hmm.
right? So I could be in love with it, but again, like I've said a lot in interviews, even with mainstream media, I don't endorse any system,
Yeah.
um,
Uh,
because it keeps me from being it, to have a goal. Here's what I want society to look like, and if I have a goal, then I'm going to be less impartial in looking at evidence and thinking about how things are and
Yeah,
looking.
and in your humility, I think you've said this many times that you just don't know what's best. I don't either. I mean, people
Yeah,
ask me, I don't know what the best system is. I
yeah.
know that the way I
Evil.
prefer living my life, but hell, I know most MGTOWs can't even live my life because I'm really hermetic. And I mean, this conversation is like my bi-yearly conversation with a female, because otherwise, my only interaction is me occasionally being in a restaurant offering commands to a serving wench, but that's about it. So I. I I don't really know what's best for the rest of the world, and I think one thing that really should be emphasized, as you said, most men, as you said in one of your earlier videos, the only way they can derive a positive identity, and for that matter, a healthy psychology for themselves, is through this gynocentric interaction of approval from society, which is basically the same thing as women,
Yeah,
and they just can't, they have no other way of being contented. And so going their own way is just, they could never do it. I mean,
yeah,
I have friends, waning friendships with men who I guess sort of understand my position and understand how things work, but they just they
yeah.
say I had a friend a couple of months. He said, "You mean you're really never gonna have sex again?" I said, "Well, I'm not planning not on having it, but if it never happens again, I don't really care either way."
Yeah.
And it just he just couldn't fathom it. And I
Yeah.
think most men would, even if they have some understanding,
Hmm.
couldn't do it themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's really the thing. And I'm this is one of the things that I really resent feminism for. I mean, like, it's left my grandchildren and my children. It'll leave them nothing but regret and debt, right? But it's completely poisoned uh, sort of any healthy relationship between the sexes. Um, and I know a lot of MGTOWs would argue that traditionalism wasn't a healthy relationship between the sexes, but we're, you're talking evolution on a societal scale, right? It's not natural selection, right? We're not the only thing that's preventing us natural selection from applying right now is invisible money that doesn't actually exist, right? It's that credit card balance that we're carrying that we're making the minimum payments on. That's all that's stopping natural selection from imposing itself on this society. So, when you sort of look at it in evolutionary terms, well, I know that no other system was possible or was, more, I guess, efficient because no other system arose.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, yeah, and as you've said many times, most people aren't Spock. Most MGTOWs aren't even Spock,
No.
and it's impossible to just shed millions of years of evolution, or hundreds of thousands in the case of hominids. And I mean, as far as healthy, I guess I'm a bit of an outlier. I don't ever think about relationships, but yeah, certainly for those men who want to still entertain those notions, the state of society makes it quite difficult. And I think actually there are definitely significant numbers of MGTOW who, if it weren't for the state of affairs we're in now, with feminism and capital F and
No.
lowercase, and all the things that go on in the government, and then
And
on
the
a local
law.
level, they probably would have gotten married or shacked up or whatever. Because it's mostly just the danger issue and the difficulties.
Yeah, and I
But
mean, you have to look at it too from the point of view, because I know a lot of these guys, um they maybe are the product of divorce, or an abusive mom, or an abusive dad, or just a marriage. Their parents were married and were not happy, um or a lot of people these days, because there's so many that have come from that. um they can't imagine such a thing as a happy marriage that ends with a widow or a widower rather than an ex-wife and an ex-husband. um but that's what I grew up with. My parents are still together. They celebrated their 50th um last year, I believe, and their parents stayed together until my grandfather died, and my grandmother on my dad's side, and they so I grew up in, like, sort of an uh absurdly well-oiled family, right? And so I'm also coming at it from the perspective of, because some of the guys in that thread, that from the way that they talked, they could not imagine the possibility of a marriage that wasn't
okay,
abusive.
I hate to interrupt. You're definitely, since I'm just predicting it, you're gonna get a lot of shit for what you just said. But the funny thing is that my parents are still together. I'm meeting up with them in Italy in the end of April, and reasonably normal. There are ups and downs. Reasonably normal household, and I mean, for me, there are just lots of little pragmatic things. I've said a
Yeah.
million times, I don't like talking to women for the most part because the shit they talk about bores me to tears.
Oh God.
Uh, it's just not interesting to me, and why would I want a person around me 24/7 who's telling me things that don't interest me just so I
Yeah.
can fuck her for half an hour or something. It just doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. No,
There,
it's
there's a lot of stuff like that for me, just little things, and of course, then doing things that don't interest me, like shopping in clothing stores, and why bother with all that? It's not because I don't think that some version of that could work. It's just I have a complete unwillingness to compromise on stuff like that because I just want to do what I want. I live one life. It's halfway over already, or maybe even closer to that. I don't know. Why should I spend all this time, doing things I don't want to do and talking about things that don't interest me with people, with particularly women whose intellectual interests range from the Gap and Michelle Phan's fashion channel. I don't know, it just
well,
doesn't. Yeah.
why do you think that there were all kinds of fraternal clubs and stuff
Yeah,
like
to escape. I mean, I
that
still remember you talking about the London coffee
thing? Yeah.
gatherings where the women, and I was reading up on that just recently because I just wanted to refresh my memory.
Yeah.
They wrote to the king saying, all this caffeine they're consuming allegedly is, infringing upon their ability or impinging upon their ability to perform in the bedroom and
Yeah.
their household duties. And exactly, I mean,
Not coming home,
yeah.
right? They're not doing what we want, which is to be around here so we can nag them.
So yeah, I think that can definitely work. It just fuck. I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want any bitch telling me what to do. I do what I want, and if
Well,
people have a problem, that's cool. But
I think up until, and I think this is something that men don't know these days, because they've never lived it. But up until not too long ago, there were those places where men went where women weren't allowed. I remember watching the Flintstones when I was a kid with the Loyal Order of Water Buffaloes, and it was quite satirized and made to appear sort of kooky. But at the same time, I remember the one episode where Wilma and Betty were they're so curious about what those men are getting up to that they disguise themselves as men and new members, right? And then they went through the hazing process, and which involved a lot of running a gauntlet of being paddled on your bottom and all kinds of weird stuff like that. And they really regretted doing what they did, to just find out that these men were doing something completely boring to them, right? It was
yeah,
just
I
this is
mean,
like our asses. We can't sit down for a week because uh, we wanted to sit and listen to men talk about stuff that doesn't interest us.
yeah, and I think that's. I mean, it's not that it can't work. It's just I just never, or nor or for that matter, I know that there are women out there who exist who are occasionally interested in these subjects. It's just most of them are not, and so most relationships I've been in, I've observed, just seem to be this kind of, okay, I'll give you some attention and I'll go to the clothing store with you, and you occasionally let me play my video game or have a conversation with my mates or whatever, and it's just
Well,
you know.
I think what I'm getting at though is that um, men these days have grown up in a culture that has never allowed men to just be men together without women,
Hmm.
um, and so I think like they've never really experienced an era because all that's banned now. You're not allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to exclude women, and so I mean there's always sort of all the way up, and I think the entirety of society, um, all the way through, everything that made us human, is completely dependent on the father-child bond and paternal investment. I think that, and I've said before, I think that that's probably one of the main things that brought us here, as these naked apes with the big brain. Um, and also cooperation between men. And I think that cooperation between men it's completely different from cooperation between women, and it's much more fragile, and it requires much more nurturing and respect, um, that men be allowed to build relationships with other men where women have no part in it. And you can't do even the Boy Scouts. You can't even have a fucking all male Boy
Well,
Scout.
to this day, look at the United States. There are tons of all women colleges and universities. It
Hmm.
doesn't exist for men.
No.
I mean, if someone, let's say, so just imaginary situation, multi-billionaire said, I'm founding a university only for men. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a fantasy. They would just laugh at him at the
Oh, they
best case
wouldn't laugh
scenario.
at him. They'd string him up.
Well, yeah,
They'd have their torches and their pitchforks, and they'd string him up. He's a misogynist. He's a sexist. He hates women. You
all
know,
women gyms, all women. I mean, I don't actually have a problem
all
with
male
women
space.
having that shit. It's just men
No.
never have the equivalent.
Yeah, no, but any all male space now is like fraternities are the last bastion of the all male space, and what are they? They're rape factories,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So you look at it, and they've over the last century, men have been isolated from each other in ways I think that has never actually occurred before. Um, and because I think that sort of the male cooperation between males is the weak link. It really is. Um, the in group bias, the lack of it, right? It's the
yeah,
weak
and the
link.
willingness to, and quite literally, kill each other sometimes.
Yes, and particularly over women. You
Exactly. Yep.
you look at those two messages. They're coming to hurt our women, and they're such monsters. They hurt their own women. Those are messages that conservatives say about Muslims here in the West, and they're messages fundamentalist imams say about American men.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
middle,
look at any study of primitive societies, particularly the tribes in the Amazon, and you just see this, the masses of death and murder of men killing each other, other men, in order to assume top dog position. So so he can inseminate some woman. It
so
is fragile, but that's, I think, ultimately why it's so important to have a MGTOW community, because
yes,
for whatever
but it's
reason,
also why it's so difficult.
well, it's difficult, but I think for all of our differences, and man, the gods know there are a lot of differences between the men going their own way and approaches, but I think there's certain key aspects, you know, and for the most part, yeah, it's there's not a uniformity, but we know that we can allow women to interfere or influence our conversation or thought processes, unless they're saying something sensible, which is rare, of course, or rational, which is equally rare.
Yeah.
And that's why we just kind of cut them out of the conversation. Not because we hate, well, at least from my perspective, not because we hate them, but because what they have to say generally has no relevance to what we're saying.
Well,
And
because men and women are fundamentally different, and
yeah,
so the way men need to talk to each other is going to be completely different from the way women talk to each other, and the way men see their position in life and experience it is completely different from the way women think they do, right? Like this is one of the most distressful things about the last century or so is sort of this way that certain women have imposed uh, an intent and a state of mind and a set of experiences and all of that onto men, right? And they've sort of become the authority as far as describing. And of course, here I am doing it too, describing. Well, but I'm not actually so much, but describing the way men think and feel and what their motivations are and all of those things. And when you have actual men say that's not how it is, that's not how I think, that's not how I feel, that's not my experience of the world, right? Then they get called a mansplainer and a misogynist and the whole bit, right? And because men have been isolated from each other so much, um it's really easy for a lot of, and this was so what was going on with Cenk Uyghur on the Young Turks when he flipped his shit and started demanding that I make him a ham sandwich, right? Um, was
I didn't even know you were on the Young Turks.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got oh, Karen, I had no idea. I got to check that out.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah. Oh, you do. You got to check it out because it was pretty funny. Don't get upset. I know you won't get upset for me that when he started yelling because that it's not something that would upset me, but I was actually laughing when he was flipping his nut. But but essentially the deal was I was explaining the process of the expansion of the franchise and how the suffragettes really they may have even delayed women's suffrage because they were acting out. They were being essentially domestic terrorists, and a lot of the discussion turned to like, if women act like this, should they even have the vote? Um, and and it's not like that was the first time women's suffrage came up. There was, sort of discussions over the previous 50 years. Do we give women the vote? The question of votes for women, and they would sort of do polls of, women didn't want it. The majority of women didn't want the vote at that time. And then he starts going, yada yada yada, Karen, of course, and women in Saudi Arabia love the burqa, and and oh, and
Typical Jenk.
I'm sure those women back then, the men would have totally given them the vote, without them, you know. And I'm thinking, you are the epitome of one good man syndrome, right? The absolute epitome of one good man syndrome, right? Because just like American men throw Muslim men under the bus, they rape their own women, they beat their own women, right? And fundamentalist imams do the same thing about American men. They sexually degrade and beat their women. Um, you are there saying the men of a generation before you are such brutes, but not me. No, I
Well,
would have had the
Jenk has a terrible track record. This was a couple of years ago, but he had made a very famous faux pas. I don't even know if he recanted, but he basically there was some incident of a school teacher having sexual relations with a minor, a male,
Oh
and
yeah.
he was just going, "Yeah, man, that guy, he nailed that, that bitch.
Oh,
Nice
it's a
job."
dream come true for that kid.
Yeah, yeah. But of course, the reverse, every time there was a reverse, throw him in jail, blah, blah, blah.
Oh
And
yeah.
and actually, funnily enough, I think Anna Kasparian called him out on it. Cenk, don't you
Oh yeah.
think, it's kind of weird? She's 32 and he's 13 and no, no, no.
Yeah.
And is, well, it's different for guys, it's different.
Well, I'm sure it is different for guys in some ways, but in other ways it's very similar. And I think that boys are less likely to feel immediately traumatized or to feel like they've been taken advantage of.
Well, never mind.
That's
It's just a
the
it's just
height
a
of
legal
ageism.
issue. If you have look,
Yeah,
if there is an age limitation for a state or a country, and in
yeah,
the case of the United States, most states it's 18, and it's someone 20 years old. It just
yeah.
that's where it ends.
Well, and you look at it too. I mean, like, even though sort of the processes of how a boy might feel versus a girl or whatever, right? Or even how her parents might feel versus a guy's parents or whatever, right? You look at the negative sequelae, right? So this sort of the long term changes in behavior, right? Regardless of how the person is describing how they feel. And you see all the same things. You see an increase in self-harm behavior. You see an increase in alcoholism or drug problems. You see an increase in depression. You see an increase in, school grades go down. I mean, you see all of those things. They're just not necessarily, um, you know, they're not net. I think men, because they compartmentalize a little bit better, they're not necessarily connecting those negative sequelae to what happened, but they certainly have them.
And they also emote differently, and I think
They
that
do.
that's another thing. I mean, people we're all trained from birth basically to react to the female manner of emoting, and men just go about that a completely different way, and so it's
They do.
sometimes difficult to pick up on that.
The signaling is completely different. And then on top of that, when you look at the sort of the real world pragmatic consequences, if she got pregnant,
Yeah.
she could just have an abortion or put it up for adoption or whatever, right? If the teacher gets pregnant, that kid's on the hook for child support, even if he's 15 years old.
Yeah, that's how that works is
It's insane. But this is the reason that we're willing to do this to a 15-year-old boy, right? Who was raped under the law. The woman served time for it, right? we're willing to do this to him and garnish money out of his fucking paper route, right? Do you really think that and that men are going to be allowed to just walk away en masse and do their own thing?
Not en masse, and I think that's why. I mean, I'm not trying to change the world, and I think MGTOW is not gonna. I don't think you can grow MGTOW to the point where it's this huge thing. You know, it's just the only difference now. I think is that there's the internet and there's the online community and all of that stuff, and so yeah, we are actually communicating with each other across the globe. But it
Yeah,
doesn't mean we're gonna suddenly turn to 25% of the male population. It's just not going to happen.
yeah.
For the reasons you cited just now, society won't let it happen, and most men, like I said, they're just so dependent on this interaction with women.
Even
Uh,
more now that because they've been denied a masculine culture, a healthy masculine culture. It's completely not allowed, right?
yeah, and I was trying, as you said, there are no male. I'm trying to think of a single, a space that is just entirely male,
The last one
and
in Scotland, a golf course, finally was forced to start letting women in
yeah. So
just
it's
recently.
certainly not video game culture. I mean, even though a lot of certain kinds of games like shooters or what have you, they're still predominantly male. But yeah, there isn't really a safe space, if you will,
There's
anymore.
there isn't any place where you can put a sign on the door that says "No girls allowed."
Well, yeah, you'd probably be sued for that or something. I
Yeah,
mean,
you would.
and that's why, as Barbarossa said, I just don't, if a woman wants to comment in something relevant, okay, that's fine. But it's just generally speaking, I don't think women are involved or really should be involved in MGTOW discussions because they're not really what they have to say. It doesn't affect us and isn't relevant, and I
Well,
think that's a good thing.
most of the time they're trying to impose their interpretation of your experience.
Yeah, and most of the time it's the neck-bearded loser, blah blah blah,
Oh, for fuck's sake!
well, since I was doxxed, I mean, everyone sees I'm a normal-looking guy, so you know, it must be
Well,
something
there's
else
that.
then. Yeah.
And Barbarossa, like there's certainly there's nothing to what Aaron Clary said for sure.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing. I mean, I hate people. I hate to bring it up, but I mean, as I said, Barbarossa, he's kind of got a girl more or less. I mean, he's slamming that pussy all the time. So
Yep. Yep.
it's I mean, so yeah, it's mostly women coming in offering weird interpretations that really they don't understand anything about the MGTOW thing or the MGTOW philosophy. There are
Well, they
occasional
understand
exceptions. I recently, a fellow Albertian, or what do you guys call yourselves? Albertans?
Albertans.
Albertans, yeah. But the only reason she contacted me, I think, because she's a female, but came from a household with lots of, for lack of a better description, abusive females, and I think that's what sort of created an interest for her in the whole MGTOW phenomenon, as well as a more rational understanding of things.
Yeah.
But usually, female input is just utterly useless and irrelevant. And I think, yeah, it's gonna stay that way. And so maybe the whole online MGTOW community is the last, all male bastion, if you will.
Oh, now you're making me feel like an interloper.
No, look, I mean,
I'm
obviously,
just joking.
given the fact that you don't have a penis and what, but you're not a man going your own way. But I think in the manosphere in general, you've always been a respected figure, and whatever disagreements exist amongst people, I mean, I don't think that's ever really changed. And as I said, I don't think I've misunderstood your position. My understanding has always been that, you're for whatever works for the individual and you're not trying to push any one thing. And you're trying to understand stuff. And I'm totally down with that because I'm trying to understand stuff too. And I
Yeah.
don't really think I don't see you endorsing traditionalism or anything. And I know that you recognize that because of all the things you just said that MGTOW is absolutely essential at this current moment in time.
Oh, it is. It is. It absolutely is. And it's um I know there's sort of I get the sense that there's some are, this is my path. Some like you. This is just my path. It's not out of a necessarily sense of resentment, or it's just what works for me.
Yep.
And others are sort of doing the work to rule thing. Like so the marriage strike. And that's certainly not all of MGTOW. And I think that there are some MGTOW now, just given that conversation thread, who would say, well, they aren't actually MGTOW, if they're just doing it as, a work to rule action. But one of the things about it is that there's a lot of men who are sort of doing this subconsciously. They've never heard of MGTOW. They're just doing their own thing because they don't have any motivation to do anything else. There's no reward in it for them, or whatever reward there is like tiny given the investment required of them, and could be snatched away at any moment, right? And they know that. So they are making a rational decision to just do their own thing. It's just not a conscious one where it's
Yeah, I think the majority of the one who aren't actually active participants online, that makes up the majority of men going their own way. They
mm,
just, I suspect as much, and a lot of them, I see comments all the time. Yeah, man, I've been doing this kind of thing for years. I just found out about it. That this is the name for it, I guess. But
yeah, no, and this is really the thing, because it is so much of it is sort of an instinctive assessment of what's going on in the world around you, and then sometimes it goes beyond the instinctive assessment and turns into sort of a rational.
yeah,
you
I mean, men, at their best are more rational than women, and we can assess a situation. I mean, even if I weren't a kind of guy who's just kind of works for me, I still would be thinking, fuck, if I do this and get married and it doesn't work out, and fuck, I'm screwed.
yeah
It's just whatever the reasons, whatever the reasons might be, it's just not. The other thing isn't a viable option.
yeah
And even in the confines of a quote unquote relationship, not a marriage, uh, there's still dangers there. I mean, domestic abuse, using logic or things like that,
yeah
as well as all the just the day-to-day insanity that you have to engage in when you're dealing with women's nonsense.
yeah
It's just, I mean, you're bisexual, so I mean, you have firsthand experience of with women's insanity in a sexual relationship, and
well, I've never actually cared to have a serious sexual relationship.
but why
um
not, Karen? Because women are fucking annoying as hell.
um I how did I put it to Tommy Sotomayor? I prefer something more straightforward.
Yeah.
I prefer a relationship that, and a lot of men have a hard time giving that to a woman, because they know from experience that a woman can't actually tolerate that kind of relationship. A straightforward one where, you know, if I mean, for instance, if my boyfriend has an issue with me, he just comes out and says it. He just like, this place is too cluttered, right? And you've been off work for the last 3 days. Like, what the hell? And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. And I'll get up and I'll start to tidy up. Um, but or I'll say, well, I'm busy, so it's just not on my priority list. But a lot of women can't respond that way to that kind of thing at all. They take it as a personal thing, or they get really annoyed about it. It starts a fight.
Yeah, women aren't very direct either. They're always kind of going about things in a roundabout way.
Mm, they
And
come at it, from some weird angle, right? And frankly, that's how I tend to do things for about 3 days a month. But I'm very aware of the fact that that's what I'm doing, and I try to guard against that. But yeah, that's probably too much information for your audience. But
yeah,
um,
really? So you find no, this is kind of interesting. So when you're bleeding, basically, you're saying that you can actually observe I guess, a transformation in your mentality and how you're approaching things?
Yeah, well, it's definitely how I will beat around the bush, and
Mm.
I'll be upset about something, but I won't want to talk about that. I'll want to talk about this, that, and the other thing,
Yeah, but see, I
right?
think that makes all the difference because being aware of the kind of irrational stuff that we do, I mean, that's we're all running on this autopilot ultimately, but being aware of that stuff is what actually makes the difference. Not being aware of that, as most people aren't, most women specifically in relationships, that's what causes all the problems and leads to, fights and arguments and disruptions and divorces and all this other shit.
Yeah.
And
Well, and half the time people will couples will tangle with each other and they will fight and fight and fight, and they'll take it all the way to a divorce, and they won't even have identified what it is that caused it all, at the base level. And it really is because things just sort of go straight through to the back of our brain and then to our body, and then our brain detects what our body is doing and says, okay, I'm feeling this, and then the last stop on the fucking train is creating a narrative around that and trying to figure out some rational reason why we feel that way. And so we'll invent things. We'll invent reasons why we felt that
and you'd
way.
be surprised how long it lasts. I mean, my aunt, she still resents her ex-husband 30 years after the divorce. She has the entire narrative, probably longer than fucking War and Peace, and
Yeah.
still there 30 years after the fact. Like, okay, get
Oh yeah.
over it,
No.
aunt.
And it's just, and so much of it is bound to be complete bullshit.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Because
he wasn't a prize, but man, she exaggerates a lot.
yeah. Well, again, like we particularly if we feel like we've wronged somebody, right? Or if we've done something wrong, or if we've made a mistake, then we try harder to rationalize why it was the right reason, why it was the right decision to do that, why it wasn't actually wrong in that person, it was justified, because everybody wants to feel like they're a good person and that they do the right thing, right? So you sort of have this, like this thing at the front of our heads is like the greatest gift, and it's also the source of so much, so many problems, because of its ability to craft narratives that don't necessarily resemble
I
reality at
imagine
all.
you're referring to the frontal cortex. Yeah,
Yes.
right. Yeah. Okay. For clarification for the audience, she's referring to the frontal cortex, which, it's interesting you mentioned the frontal cortex, but I mean, as many of you might know in the audience, I'm sure Karen knows, is that it is the last part of the brain body period to mature. I mean, if you're below 25, chances are your frontal cortex isn't fully developed yet, and so that's very indicative of just how late a development that was in a mammalian species, and particularly in the human ape. I mean, which is I always thought was pretty interesting, and its interaction with, say, the limbic system, and yeah,
Well, and the fact that everything else happens before we get to that point
yeah.
where your frontal cortex is dealing with it. And so, but it all happens like a millisecond apart. So we sort of almost have this idea that that the process is in the opposite direction, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
something stimulates us, we make a rational decision about why we're upset about it, and then we get upset about it. No, that's not what happens at all. Um, so this is why it can be such a bad interpreter of reality. I mean,
But
it can be beautiful, but
and now that we're on this topic, I mean, don't you think at the end of the day, this is kind of the key problem with, quote unquote, fixing feminism? I mean, feminism and people's understanding of it is all about these weird post hoc rationalizations, and I mean, I often I understand why, for example, your position, why you would consider yourself an anti-feminist and stuff, but I mean, everyone on some level buys into the feminist narrative because the feminist narrative is a gynocentric narrative, and most of us buy into that automatically.
Well, there you go. But you have to work with reality here.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the reality is that nobody's going to give up gynocentric. Like society is not, the species isn't just going to completely drop gynocentrism. Um, and it's like I said, I have serious doubts as to whether it would be willing to liberate men the way it liberates women, because we could only afford to liberate women at the cost of keeping men in their roles, right? Um, so as taxpayers and tax generators and
Yeah.
all of that. And so, I mean, when you look at the whole shebang, I think it's so much easier to convince people that feminism is lying to you. And it's one of the reasons I go back into all the way back into the history of the suffrage and the pre-suffrage movements, prohibitionism and the abolitionist movement, and even all the way back to Byzantium, and talk about what was going on there as well. Um, when I think it was, oh God, what was her name, Theodora, or I freaking forget, started to decide, convinced her husband to give women this right and that right and the other, and then things started to fall apart over the next 100 or 200, 500 years. But um, that it's so much easier to convince people that feminism is lying to them. They don't want to hear it. Cenk didn't want to hear it on the Young Turks, because the conversation that we were having was about the early women's movement and how bogus our understanding of it is now. I mean, did he have any idea they were lobbing bombs and setting fire to post offices and stuff and killing people? Did he have any idea they were doing any of that?
Well, Jenk isn't exactly, in my observation, a bright or knowledgeable
Yeah,
guy.
but
Uh,
nobody has any idea. I wasn't taught this stuff in school. I had to go out looking for the information, right? I had to go out and look for it. It wasn't taught to me. I was always taught in school that the suffragettes got women the vote, when in reality most of the groundwork was laid by the early suffragist movement that started in around the 1830s, and and sort of the gradual expansion of the franchise to include more and more people. Um, but a lot of those people actually were subjected to real problems, like being uh, dying in prison, or being exiled to Tasmania, or uh, being sentenced to death, or being killed by police, right? Unlike the suffragettes, who got their own wing in the prison with hot and cold running water. But uh, you sort of, we don't ever hear about that. We hear that these were brave women who put their own lives on the line, right, to earn you the right to have a voice. Bullshit.
well, never mind their classism. I mean, they didn't want the lower class women getting these rights.
Of course not. And on top of that, they had voices all the way through, right? They convinced most of the US to seriously consider, I think they happened almost concurrently, the two amendments, women's suffrage and prohibition. The prohibition amendment may have occurred after, I forget, but all of the all of the lobbying happened before women's suffrage. Um, all of that stuff, those women had voices in their society. Those women had every right to speak their mind. They were writing editorials in the paper and letters to the editor and all kinds of stuff. Like when you're looking at a newspaper article from 1910 and it's written by a woman lawyer, right? Oh, 60 years before feminists came along and earned women the right to an education, right? Like it's all a fucking load of shit. And because the documentation is there, right? All this, you can pull up these newspaper stories. You can pull up all of this information. Here's that New York Times article from 1910, right? And it's so much easier to prove to people that they've been lied to about feminism.
But even so, I mean, when you're talking to Jenk, and I also watched another interview you did with, God, what's that guy's name? He runs a progressive.
Pac-Man.
Yeah. Man,
I'm
that
actually
guy was
on
just
his
so
show.
deflective, and I
Oh yeah,
watched
I'm
it. And,
going back on his show on the 25th,
oh, have fun.
to have a discussion with him and a feminist.
Yeah, but see, what are what are the chances that you're going to be able to convince people of that sort, that ilk, or the jinx of the world? I mean,
It's not so much convincing Cenk, but if you go to that video,
I will
and
later.
I
Yeah.
can send the link later, but and you go and read the comments and you look at the downvote ratio, the upvote downvote ratio, and there were even people like people saying, usually I'm a fan of the Young Turks. Why were you yelling? You totally went Bill O'Reilly. She was actually saying some interesting things, and I wanted to hear what she had to say.
A lot of that might have to do with the fact that you're a woman. Let's not
Of
forget that,
course,
because
of
he was
course
a
it does.
guy being quote unquote aggressive, at least in tone,
Yeah.
towards a woman. Yeah.
Well, and it came on the heels. He did a very long, I think it was 3 hours, interview with Sam Harris.
I watched that. Oh my, yeah, it was awful.
And
I'm
so
a,
people were already primed to not be happy with his
yeah,
debate style.
yeah.
So
It was awful, and I'm someone who I'd say Sam Harris is one of my top three public favorite intellectuals, and it
I
was
do.
terrible. It was a waste of his time, I think, overall.
Oh, it was. Well, but it wasn't in the sense that so many of Chank's viewers recognized that he was being unreasonable, right? And so, I mean, you sort of look at that, like I'm not there to convince Chank. I'm not there to convince David Pakman. And although David Pakman is way more freaking unbiased than most of the
The
people.
interview you need to do, I would love to see it, is an interview with Sam Harris, because there was one incident with, I'm sure you know Sam Harris, Four
Yes.
Horsemen and all that.
Yep.
He got accused by a feminist of being,
Mm.
misogynist, blah blah blah, and then he wrote this response, and it was
Oh, I
just,
read that.
it was weird. It was like what he said literally. What did he say? He said, I respect women more than men. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I just do. Just weird things that are uncharacteristically irrational for him. And
Yeah.
he's
Well, but he like this is the way it is. I mean, like even look at Steven Pinker and the better angels of our
but
natures, right?
I
Like the woman.
finally got the order the book. I'm picking it up tomorrow. I'm gonna read it.
Well, that like I've listened to How the Mind Works on audio. I've read most of the Blank Slate.
I read
I
Blank
don't
Slate
know
twice.
whether I
Yeah.
want to pick up Better Angels of Our Natures because I just
Well, speaking of the Blank Slate, that was I I just can't figure out what his thing is, because he has this whole chapter, as you know, where he's
mm,
talking. He actually cites women sociologists saying, maybe women don't want to get in, these engineering fields or whatever.
yeah.
But the preface of it, if I recall, paraphrasing, is something along the lines of blah 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 blah, and thousands of years of oppression, and so he
Yeah.
has to fit that in, and
Oh, well, so
then
does so do so many people that I sort of respect. Christina Hoff Sommers, I've heard her say that. Well, of
well,
course,
what
women
is
will
your take on her?
contribute to
Because
the
she calls herself an equity feminist, which is I don't.
well, she's definitely conservative
Yeah,
in
yeah.
most of her politics, and um, I think she's sort of a very good middle ground. She's a little bit of a gateway drug in that sense to looking at the issues a little differently, at least the contemporary
I think
issues.
she's better than nothing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I still think that she's sort of living under the impression that women were sort of arbitrarily historically oppressed, and they were
Yeah,
kept out
yeah.
of this and that for no
But
reason.
the
Which,
question is, do these people believe it? Because when Steven Pinker writes that in, say, The Blank Slate, I'm thinking, this dude is fucking super smart. There's no way, and he researches everything so meticulous, there's no way he actually believes this. He's just doing this to appease the,
I
you know, the,
hope that
the
I hope
fembots.
that's the case, and you might find out if when you read Better Angels of Our Nature whether that is the case. But he may one of the things that I've talked about a lot, at least in comments, is particularly in comments on mainstream articles. So, the Daily Caller or, the Weekly Standard or whatever, right? Like, which is where I've been spending most of my time lately. Is places other than the manosphere, and just leaving comments. And what what I find really upsetting is that when we study aggression, right? We're almost always studying direct aggression, right? And we're not studying the ways that women are aggressive. We're not
Mm.
studying the, so yeah, boys are rough and tumble, and boys will get into shoving matches and stuff like that, and that's boy aggression, and it's very obvious, right? Whereas a girl will um, run up to someone, an adult, and say a boy was picking on her, whether he was or he wasn't. And then that boy is punished. And that's not seen as aggression as well.
Never mind the verbal malice that can come from women. I mean, neurologically speaking, there's not a huge difference. I mean, we do
No.
say sticks and stones can, but that's bullshit. I mean, words can hurt, and women are can be viciously
Oh, brutal.
aggressive
They're
in that
just
manner.
fucking brutal. And, so, I mean, you sort of look at the way aggression plays out. And then if we were to add on top of all of the relational aggression that girls seem to come by naturally, and men tend to, they sort of learn how to do it through just trial and error and experience. I don't think it comes naturally to them so much, but it's becoming more and more common among men in the workplace now, um, in adulthood. But you sort of look at that and you add it all up and you compare it against male aggression. Well, what if we were to add up things like false accusations, which are the majority of false accusations are made by women and made against men, right? And this is, anything domestic violence, abuse, child sexual abuse, about 80% of false accusations are made by women. And if I were to smack my boyfriend around and like tie his hands and lock him in the tool shed for 3 days, I'd be guilty of like a whole bunch of felonies. And if I were to hire some thug to do it for me, right, I'd be guilty of all those felonies plus criminal conspiracy, right? But if I call the cops and say he's hitting me, and then the cops come and rough him up and slap some cuffs on him and shove him in a cell for 3 days, I'm just guilty of filing a false police report, and that's not seen as aggression,
Well,
but
it's a
that's what it
traditional
is.
proxy power and hypoagency
Abs-
thing at work.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, but we don't see that as aggression, and it absolutely, absolutely is. So, if we were to add all of that in there, I have to wonder which of the sexes is more aggressive than the other.
And I just have to wonder about
Particulars.
these academics because, I mean, full disclosure, I've been for a while now because I've been so involved in my own reading up on Evo Psych. Actually, been considering going for a PhD, a doctoral degree in evolutionary psychology. I don't have an official background in it, but I've done so much reading. Maybe I could find some way to segue into it.
Yeah.
And one of the major obstacles, apart from being living on the street because you can't earn a living with that shit, is just if I were to do that, the kind of research I want to do, I want to be honest. I don't want to fucking put up a front saying, well, with some sort of, precursor saying, or pretext, well, we know that women were oppressed, but no, I just want to, what I'd like to do is take a lot of the data, some of the data that's been talked about in MGTOW, talk about divorce rates, talk about all these details and how it applies cross culturally and maybe actually put some of the stuff that has been talked about in the manosphere in an official academic context, well researched, of course, hopefully. I don't know if that's permissible. I don't know if that could even get off the ground. And so that's one thing that always makes me think twice about that.
I think that it's the tiny percentage of highly, highly rational women who are going to have to crack that nut.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
you
Because I
know,
would
and
just be a misogynist probably for doing that.
yeah, and I mean, there are a few out there who, there's just a blog, a WordPress blog called Darwinian Gender Studies.
Yeah, I read that, Karen, but my issue with that is she still had this whole feminine, she still was going
Yes.
on about the oppression bullshit.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, you look at it. here's the thing, even with that caveat, well, of course women were oppressed through history. Evo Psych is really not very flattering to women at all.
No, no,
It
no.
it exposes all of the sort of the nitty gritty, ugly underbits, and all of the sort of not quite sweet and sunshine motivations that women have, and the ways that they behave that are that we don't want to look at, even if it doesn't necessarily go at it quite as brutally as we might like, brutally honestly. It still exposes them, and I think this is
Yeah.
one of the
Well, that's
reasons.
also one of the reasons why you'll always hear, "Oh,
Oh,
evil psych's a bunch of bullshit," and I
yeah,
always say, "What's the fucking alternative? Your pseudo history with the
yeah,
feminist
yeah.
perspective? I mean,
Oh God, like it's the most scientific field of explaining human behavior that we have,
yeah,
um, and or that we're probably capable of. And
yeah,
when I was reading Male Female: The Evolution of Human Sex Differences by David Gary, one of the things he said in his preface was, I I have always found it absolutely strange that we study the behavioral differences of every single species on the planet through an evolutionary lens, except for ourselves, right? We don't do that with
too
ourselves.
scary."
It is. It's
Honestly,
really,
Karen, between you and me, I honestly think that Evo Psych should be a mandatory fucking subject in schools. I think it should be like biology. Oh, I got Evo Psych at 2 o'clock. Because
yeah.
how else are people gonna understand their behavior beyond all the rationalizations they give themselves? I mean, understanding the difference between, say, ultimate cause and distal and proximate and things like that.
Well, I mean,
I,
and it's so easy to explain something that's non-controversial, right? Like, we like salty foods, we like fatty foods, we like sweet foods,
yeah,
and the reason why we like those things and sort of eat them compulsively, is because we lived in a different set of circumstances for most of our evolution, and the people that acquired a taste for those things survived better and had a better chance of passing on their genes, right? So uncontroversial, because we can see the health negatives of those things. So we can see them on paper, we can see them on charts that scale trends of obesity and type 2 diabetes and tooth decay and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I still remember in the movie Never Cry Wolf, um, the uh, the Inuit guy who was guiding the white dude Farley Mowat, wrote about it. He smiles and his teeth are all rotted, and he said, and oh my goodness, your teeth. And he says, well, this is what happens when a meat eater becomes a sugar eater. um, so we can see all of those negatives. They're the very black and white negatives. When it comes to sex differences or racial differences, or ethnic differences, we don't want to think that the the we don't want to think that there's any difference at all.
yeah, which is ludicrous. I mean, the problem, part of the problem, I think, and I've encountered this, and you have as well, is that when you describe something, sometimes you describing something is somehow interpreted as you being pro or for it. Like, for
Yeah.
example, I'm actually working on a video on violence in the context of obedience. I'm sure you heard of Stanley Milgram experiments, stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to offer a disclaimer saying no, I don't support any of the things I'm describing, because people tend to do that. Now, if you say that there are differences between the sexes or there are differences between the races, then there's always some sort of negative ascribed to it. And I think that tends mostly to come from liberal people, left wing people. They think
Yeah.
if you acknowledge something is then to automatically take the worst from it, which doesn't have to be the case. I just think it's more honest doing that. You don't have
Well,
to.
if you if
Yeah.
if you acknowledge it, then you're obviously going to use it to justify
Right, right,
discriminating against individuals.
right. And there's no doubt that there are historical cases where people have used differences to justify things. But if you try to stay rational, there's no need there's no need to do that. I think, and you can there's no, for example, you can say that generally speaking, men are more spatially oriented, and you'll find fewer women engineers. But in the case of your own daughter, right? She's mathematically gifted, and she kind of, as by your own acknowledgement, kind of sucks at the whole interaction social thing, right?
Social thing, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, there are
Thankfully,
anomalies, and nothing's preventing her from going into engineering if she wants to do that. I mean, it's all cool. It's
yeah,
and offering a general description of trends and differences between the sexes isn't going to change the individual fact of your daughter's own abilities. And people don't get that. That they think that then if I say that or you say that, oh, that you're saying your daughter can't do this. No, no, because we're talking about general trends here, and they don't
yeah.
get that. So,
Yeah, no, and they don't get that the whole reason why people bring up these differences, particularly between men and women, is not to promote discrimination, but to actually discourage discrimination. Because in order to actually get engineering to be 50-50, you either have to have economic circumstances that are so severe that women will do something that is completely unfulfilling to them, right? Because that's what's
pragmatism.
necessary,
Yeah.
right? Um, or you have to discriminate against men, right? Like I would never be in favor of a 50-50 quota in nursing,
Mm.
or even in primary school education, where I think that it would be more important. It would have more of a social benefit to have more male teachers. And I would not have thought that if things were if family life was like it was 100 years ago, um, with a father in most homes. But we don't have that now. So, I saw changes in my son's enthusiasm for school the very first time he had a male teacher. And that's just a subconscious thing on his part. That's the desire to impress an adult male role model is enough to make him more interested in school,
Yeah.
right?
And we actually
And
have real social experiments. I mean, it's been observed many times that in the most sort of quote unquote egalitarian societies, Scandinavia, you get more of these gender trends in a much more pronounced way,
yeah,
And
because
whereas,
everybody has the freedom to do what they feel compelled to do.
yeah,
Um, like in that movie here in Basque, the documentary, they interviewed the nurses. Why would I want to do that? It's more interesting working with people.
yeah,
And the men, the engineers, were like, well, why would I want to do that? I like systems. I like building things.
yeah,
So it's just, and I've helped my boyfriend on some of the stuff that he does. And I mean, he's an engineer, and so I've proofread some of his stuff, and he does a lot of sort of highly technical gobbledygook on the computer that sort of just needs to be checked for typos,
yeah.
right? And it is the most mind-numbingly boring shit that I could imagine. And he does that 8 hours a day, and he comes home happy. And I have no clue how anybody could do that.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I can relate. I've always been more of a, I'm not that spatially gifted. I probably have more of the female talents than otherwise. And even if I were to get involved in Evo Psych, I mean, there are tons of women involved in that field as well. So, yeah, there. But do
Sorry,
you?
that's my phone going off if you can hear it, but I'm just going to leave it ring.
Okay, okay. Do you think it's even possible to come to a point where we can say, yes, men and women are different, and yes, there are racial differences as well. I mean, obviously, people who have evolved in geographic isolation from each other are going to, particularly in reference to temperature. I mean, you can look, for example, at the way fat is deposited differently in, say, in Europeans as opposed to Africans, and there are all sorts of other things
Hmm.
without just automatically jumping on. So we're going to discriminate then.
Oh, God.
It just seems an impossible task. In fact, it seems even an impossible task convincing people that you're not a misogynist or a racist for saying, well, yeah, genders are different, and there are some racial distinctions. But so what? That's what we're saying. So what?
Yeah.
Uh, but they don't get that. People don't get that.
They don't get it. I mean there is, and I'm we're going to talk about slavery, right? And
Mm.
so I can absolutely see why people would be extremely touchy about any kind of discussion of differences between, say, blacks and whites, Africans and Europeans.
Yeah.
I can completely see that because there was some very, very definite bullshit going on not that long ago, really, in sort of the grand scheme of things. But as far as, and there's still bullshit that's going on.
Yeah.
Um,
There's no doubt. I mean, I think all of us on some level, and there's evidence of it, that we're all innately. I mean, we have our this natural
yeah,
tribalistic thing.
yeah.
Uh,
But what feminism did was it tricked us into believing that men and women operate on, like, that the dynamic between men and women operates on the same dynamic as racism or tribalism, and that, I've had feminists say this to me, the experience of women through history was no different from the experience of blacks during slavery. And uh, and I, I'm just,
what a horrible analogy.
I know, I was just no wonder black women are abandoning feminism in droves, um, or at least white feminism, because this was a white male feminist, of course, telling me this. Um, but you have this. They've managed to convince us, and particularly they've managed to convince men, that this is the case, right? And that's sort of the one good man thing coming into play, where men are willing to believe the worst of other men, because it sets them apart,
Yeah.
right? In that way. And so it's not justified, and the differences between the sexes are so much bigger than the differences, any kind of differences in
Yeah,
intellect.
I just want to go on record. I mean, I'm accused of dodging. I'm here, guys. Everyone, listen. Yes, there are racial distinctions between people. Obviously, East Asians, Africans, Europeans, etc. But those differences between the races are minimal compared to the differences between the sexes. I think that should go
Oh,
without
they're
saying.
teeny, teeny, tiny. A white man has more in common in his behavior and the way he thinks and processes the world and all of that, than he has more in common with a black man than a white man does with a white woman.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
absolutely, so the differences are so much huger, and then the dynamic of interaction is so different, right? That I think it's completely, like, I think there is some justification to saying we need to be really, really super, super careful about talking how we talk about differences between the races. Um, but I don't think it's justified in the same way when we talk about differences between the sexes, because the differences are so much more profound,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the relationship between the sexes is so profoundly different.
absolutely. I mean, you can just look at it in terms of evolution. I mean, racial distinctions might been around maybe 100,000, maybe 200,000 years. But the differences between the sexes, I mean, you can go back to the
Predated
beginning of
human.
mammalian, yeah, species. I mean, it's far more potent, and I think it's a kind of a trick of language, of artifice on the part of feminists to then sort of assimilate into themselves, say the oppression that black people face in the South in the United States. Oh, we were treated in similar terms, and it's so ludicrous.
Oh my God. They actually, there was actually, I forget whether it was Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Susan B. Anthony who described women as the new Negroes or something like that. She wrote some speeches and some treatises on how women were essentially like the Negro. Um, and uh, and then Susan B. Anthony, I believe, came out and said that um, if it comes to the question of suffrage for black men or suffrage for women, give it to the women first because white women are more responsible and intelligent than black men. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, if we give the vote to black men, what will become of our white daughters, right? Because then now all these rapey black men will be able to run loose with rights and all that. And also she said that if black men got the vote before women did, then if blacks got the vote in an era of male only suffrage before women did, black women would be subjected to an era of oppression that would be worse than anything they experienced under slavery, under their own men. I mean, these women were not nice. These women were not moral.
I mean, Susan B. Anthony, I remember back in the day, I remember learning in the 80s, what a great woman she was, a hero.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And they'll have statues erected to them, and you learn in school about how wonderful that, none of this comes up. And it, it's the most disgusting display of and you can sort of maybe justify the racism there, given how racism was so much
Rampant.
more
Yeah.
acceptable, right, and so much more common. But when you think about that comment that black women would suffer an era of oppression worse than slavery if black men got the vote. I mean, that's absolutely
But
disgusting.
these women seem to me back in the day and up until recently, let's say second wave feminism, these were extreme ideologues. Now I think it's pretty much confirmed that say Anita Sarkeesian, she's not she's good at she's a con artist. She's
I
not
hope she doesn't believe what she says.
it seems to me it's obvious she doesn't. I mean with all the smiling going on
Well, and the having to she reads everything.
right.
She
So
brings a script. So
but as long as she's behind the shield of feminism, I think that's the problem.
yeah,
I mean, how do you have you seen a real change in the atmosphere of the internet with you arguing against feminists? Then there's Thunderfoot does a really good job.
yeah.
Sargon of Akkad, all these people, saying lots of stuff to basically get rid of all the nonsense we hear from the feminists. I mean, do you ever see people having aha moments, at least in the comment section, or people
All
writing to
the
you?
time, all the time, all the time.
Okay.
I probably get 2 emails a day from men, but often from women saying, I just want to thank you for what you do. I watched this video of yours, or I watched that video of yours, and it really crystallized a lot of things that I'd sort of been thinking, um, but couldn't really articulate or couldn't really put into sort of a coherent explanation.
Yeah.
Right, but I always figured something was off. It always just kind of felt not right. And uh, and so I mean, like I get constant, I get at least 2 a day like that, usually more, just emails. And I don't monitor my comments anymore. I don't even look at them anymore, really, because I just don't have the time.
Right.
But I'm sure there's others in the comments of the videos that I have that have very high view counts. They people stumble on them,
Yeah.
right? It's usually somebody who just stumbled on it, and they're contacting me to thank me. And so I mean, like, I think because so much of this is um this the post hoc rationalization of of feminism, and this sort of the post hoc explanation of what happened to what must have been going down, and it doesn't necessarily sit right with people, but it, at least not intellectually, but it feels good, right? It sort of feels right to a lot of people.
Mm.
And so when they actually stumble across somebody who's willing to explain, here's why you're having these misgivings, right? They really appreciate that, and they'll often
And
just
all the
write and
more
tell me
reason for
that,
you to go back making videos. And I think ultimately, for better or worse, you being female, I mean, as far as the wider public is concerned, you're always going to be better at this than me or say Barbarossa is really can be quite inflammatory. I mean, I'm using this in
oh,
air quotes, but
but I still love him.
well,
I'm
I
like,
like yeah, obviously he's a friend of mine. We talk,
I
reasonably
think he
free.
was the first MGTOW I actually stumbled across, and I just ate up his videos.
Yeah, but
Um,
that's because you're you. But I mean, most people out there, they. I mean, for better or worse, you're kind of like the goodwill ambassador. That's why, I think, and we were talking about before. I mean, if and when you can get back to making those videos that I think
yeah,
were such eye openers for people, and obviously the reason why people are sending you emails and thanking you, and that I think we need more of that. I mean, you're kind of the poster child for the awareness aspect of things for the general public.
yeah,
Because I think I mean Barbara, like I said, a friend. Watch his videos religiously and I love them, but that's not gonna most people are gonna not want to look at that, and
yeah.
yeah, people aren't gonna fucking spend an hour in my meanderings. So yeah, that I think that's why you gotta do your thing
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, I do. I was really disappointed. I was so sick on the weekend. I had been sort of invited sort of at the very very last minute to go down to Calgary and speak at a political convention, and I ended up having to cancel the day before because I was so sick with some weird bug that made it so I couldn't even drive a
Remember,
car.
yeah.
I felt like I was just completely stoned, like
That
just
was
absolutely completely stoned. And my boyfriend had it too, so he couldn't even drive it. And then I'm thinking, could I even stand for even 20 minutes at a podium? Because I feel like I'm going to fall over every time I get up. And but those are opportunities too, that I don't think a lot of people in, like Paul Elam doesn't generally get invited to talk at political conventions. He gets invited to speak at Kennesaw State University by somebody who's already involved in the men's movement,
right.
right? And a lot of there's not much opportunity for outreach into mainstream or non-gender affiliated, non-gender specific, gender issues specific events and stuff like that. There's not much opportunity for MRAs or MGTOWs or anybody to get out there and do that. And I've been able to somehow be invited to these places, and so
Yeah,
I really
because
do
you're
see.
articulate, and most importantly, you got the punte. I mean, as you know.
Yeah, and as I stay calm, right?
Yeah.
I I don't really get that worked up about stuff. I mean, it takes a lot to really rile me up and get me to just like say, raise my voice or whatever. And so I think that helps too. But yeah, so that's really sort of what I see as my place in all of this is just raising awareness and just telling people, like you've been lied to. Um, you know, even if I were going to say, because 90% of women in society think traditionalism was a bad system for them, and yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't an oppressive system to them. And if I can at least let them know that like men have been unjustly maligned for the last 150 years, they have been unjustly, men died for you, men gave up seats in lifeboats for you, right? And what feminism wants men to do is, oh, you want that seat? I know it's empty, but she needs room for her luggage. Here's a kick in the nuts. Goodbye, right? That's essential oppressor, shitlord, right? That's essentially what feminism tells you, because feminism has created this narrative that men all through history were doing nothing but intentionally making women's lives miserable. And it just it's so disgusting to me how so many people can believe that. I mean, like, Would you believe that of your kindly grandfather? Would you believe that of your brother who was there to, pick you up when you needed a ride? Would you believe that of the guy who stopped, none of the women stopped, right, to help you change a flat tire, right? Would you believe that of any of those men? Then why are you believing it of all men all through history?
Well, and which leads to the point. I mean, isn't this whole mentality and feminism as an ideology so entrenched in the mainstream, in society, and in academia for that matter, that it's
Oh, it is.
irreversible? I mean, I
No,
don't.
no, I don't think it is. I don't think it's completely irreversible.
Okay.
Not from the way that they have to protect it. They have to protect it by closing off comments. They have to protect it by um, crafting a narrative, by trying to. I mean, like, I don't know if you looked at the GQ article that was written recently about the conference in June, the Voice for Men ICMI conference in June. They actually photoshopped Paul Elam's and Sage Gerard's faces to make them look more menacing, to make them look evil and menacing and nasty and soulless, right? And if they have to do that, right, and almost all of the rhetoric coming out from the mainstream now is geared towards these guys are horrible, these guys are misogynist, these guys are dangerous to women. Don't go look at what they say because it's dangerous, right? And people often do go and look. They're like, oh, I'm outraged. These men must be monsters. I should go have. I want to go see what these monsters are saying, right? And some of them they post threads on Reddit. They email me. I heard this, that, and the other. I was reading David Futrell, and I was thinking these guys are horrible. And I was so outraged by his last thing that I went and I actually started to investigate for myself, and it's nothing like he said, right? But they have to protect it with lies, and they have to protect the ideology with lies and with ideological purity and with silencing of speech and with shutting down events and all of that. So if 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 that's what it takes to protect what they're telling people, then it can't last, at least
Okay,
not in
I can see that. My concern, and maybe it's also a more widespread MGTOW concern, is that I mean you are willing, in order to get an accurate picture of what's going on, to paint women in an unflattering light sometimes,
Mhm.
and I, this is been one of the more controversial viewpoints coming from the MGTOW community, that really that, and I don't think it should be, but to say that you don't have feminism without women. On the other hand, you have people who are still saying, feminism is an ideology, women are women. Yeah, okay, that's sort of true, but you don't have feminism without women because it's
True.
informed by all these instincts and our groupthink and
But you wouldn't have feminism if men weren't the way they were either.
well, but that's exactly, I get called a misandrist for that as well. I mean, yeah, basically, women being women and men giving women whatever the fuck they want all the time and
Yeah,
kowtowing to
and
their every whim.
throwing other men under the bus to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really the whole thing. It's not a woman problem. It's an everyone problem.
Yeah, it's a human problem. And I think I mean, one could refute feminism all day and get to the point where, man, these people look like idiots, and but unless we're able to, getting back to the point of just examining the way we are as human beings, men as men and women as women, and what we do to each other intrasexually as well as intersexually,
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think actual progress is going to be possible. We really need to go that deep, and just because that's the keeping that in the background in our heads, being aware of that is going to the only, to my mind, the only way of making actual progress, and once any progress has been made, preventing us from
Sliding back.
regressing back to where we were before.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. That is part of the reason why I've another part of the reason why I've sort of said I don't have any idea about what society should look like. I don't have any idea about what society could look like. How much better could it get? Um, or or how much worse could it get? Well, I kind of have an idea of how much worse could it get, but um, you know, um, it's really difficult to figure out what's possible. Other than to say that we might see a 20% correction,
Yeah.
right? And we may have to vigilantly guard that. And it may take, we may get the 20% correction. Like I said, female nature is not a pendulum, it's an engine, right?
Yep.
And without all of those other things like scarcity and war and disease and all of those things to hold it back, it's been free to just bulldoze over everything. And I don't know that men are equipped to hold it back because of the way men are with each other.
And
I
way men
cer-
are towards women.
well, yeah, but I certainly think that one of the things that is a sign of potential improvement is things like men's sheds. In I think they started in Australia, um, where men can actually go and bond with each other, um, and maybe that's what men need to be less likely to throw each other under the bus, right? Is to but they're just not offered those opportunities to do that.
And furthermore, because it's unlikely that we're going to have a civilizational collapse anytime soon, I mean, my interpretation of so much of what's been going on is that all this technology we have further obscures the reality of the sexes. The
Yes.
more life becomes comfortable, the more comfortable life becomes,
Yes.
the bigger the illusions, the greater the ease, the more difficult it is to peel away all the fucking layers that are blocking our rational minds from actually understanding this stuff properly. And
Yeah.
so actual progress becomes more difficult because,
Yeah.
as you said, there are no wars, no famines. Think life is easy. I got my iPad with a million different options and fuck, this is going to get even harder in the future.
Hmm. It is. And so maybe I'm fighting a losing battle. Maybe I'm doomed to failure. Maybe we all are, whether we're MGTOW or MRM or whatever. Maybe the PUAs have it right. Just bang women like mad and watch it all burn, right? And have a whiskey.
Maybe.
But you know, it still doesn't stop me from wanting to understand. It still
Well,
doesn't
that's the
stop me
same
from
thing. I mean,
wanting to
even
connect
I
with
might
people.
even be willing to admit this is all futile, but I still want to understand this stuff. I mean, I just feel having gone down this road, there's no return. You can't go back to blue pill mentality. So the only thing left is understanding. And if I
Yeah.
can help a couple of guys out along the way, then I'm happy for it. But I know I can't change the world, and I just got to accept that. The closest I could ever imagine change, if I could somehow infiltrate mainstream academia and actually get stuff published without feminist blah 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 bullshit interfering. But that's unlikely. I think, as you said, you're going to actually need rational women to do that.
Well,
Um,
I've also actually had been contacted by people in academia,
okay.
who, well, not just the ones who've asked me, can I use this video in my psych classes or whatever, but I've actually been contacted by people in academia who have said, please keep doing what you're doing. Um, I am in a position where I can't talk about this openly, but
Right.
once I have tenure, you can bet your sweet bippy, right? I'm going to start opening my mouth. And this is the position that Janice Fiamengo is in. She has tenure, so she's free to speak her mind. And she and I don't necessarily agree on everything. She's very sort of socially conservative and, well, not very socially conservative, but for Canada, she would be considered quite conservative. And our conservatives are still to the left of your probably maybe even your Democrats. Um, but so you look at that there are some people in academia who are just sort of waiting. They're just biding their time because they know that they won't be able to maintain the position of intellectual authority. The moment they speak out, they'll their career's over, and then nobody's going to listen to them at all. So they're biding their time till they have tenure. So
Wow. That I guess this just means you're gonna have to do a lot more work.
I guess. Oh, thanks.
I think
Thanks.
so.
I appreciate that. That's just what I want. More work. But no, I have a video that I'm scripting right now that should be up fairly soon. And then I have that thing on the 25th on David Pakman. So
Yeah, the Pac-Man thing I think is gonna be a waste of your time, but yeah.
oh well, I told him because he sort of sent a sort of an outline of what he wanted to discuss, and he says, of course, given that there's more than one guest, it's you can't predict it. And I said,
Yeah, that dude is the prototypical left-wing
yeah,
mangina. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
totally. But he has actually asked hard questions of people on the social justice warrior side of things.
Okay,
And
I
then
wasn't
then
aware.
they turned on him and accused him of doing hit pieces on them, and basically told him that he was a misogynist and blah blah blah. So, oh yeah, no. So
You
he's
better fucking agree with me, and if you don't, even a little bit, you're a misogynist.
that's right. And
That's
so
how it
and
works.
I don't know if you heard about Brianna Wu, um,
A
but
little bit. I know Sargon of Akkad mentioned her. Yeah, I just can't keep up with
oh,
all
well,
doing my own
she
thing.
was
But
on the social justice warrior side of Gamergate, and she actually went on mainstream NBC TV, right, and said it's I hate to use the word terrorism because it's just so emotionally loaded, but this is terrorism against women, right? And yeah, so she was like really, really in that group, right, on that side. And then she actually had the temerity to go out to lunch with somebody who was sympathetic to Gamergate and talk to him. And then announced it that she'd gone out to lunch with him, and he actually seems like a human being. Um, like this guy actually he's not so bad. He seems like just a guy. And they turned on her, bam, like that, excommunicated,
yeah, I mean, this
right?
is the female board consensus. I mean, this is all of them smiling and nodding each other, drinking tea. They might hate each other, but they're not going to say it out loud.
Yeah.
And it's just another aspect of female behavior that I just
Oh,
despise. All the fakery and
oh yeah, no, it's some of it is so emotionally manipulative that it's yeah, I mean, it's sort of disappointing as a woman to think that women, sort of on the whole, aren't capable of setting aside their emotions and their own interests, right?
well,
So
it never served a good evolutionary purpose. So why should they? So
I guess.
I mean that's basically the explanation. I mean, if women were quote unquote meant to be rational, then they would have evolved along those lines, and they didn't. So
That's certainly true. I don't know. Maybe there is a way to raise girls so that it's less likely that they become. I definitely know there are ways you can raise kids that make them more prone to narcissism and things like that, right?
hmm.
So maybe there is a way that we can, sort of mitigate that a little bit in the future. But
uh,
that requires an acceptance that this is what's going on, right?
yeah,
And
right. You need to understand what's going on, and I mean, I think in a lot of ways, from my understanding, your daughter is just as you're an outlier. She's an outlier amongst females as well. No.
oh, she's even more so than me. She's like completely weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, she was reading at age 2. No, I think she was doing math before she was reading. And nobody taught her that. She just picked it up.
I'm curious. I mean, she must be in her late teens by now, right?
She's 19 now.
Right. So, I mean, she
She's
being,
not in university either. She graduated high school and she's working and she's not sure what she wants to do.
yeah, but
Um,
I'm curious about what her reports or perceptions are regarding her fellow females because obviously she's very different from them.
She doesn't really. I mean, she has a group of really geeky, nerdy friends
Right.
from high school that she still hangs out with.
I assume some of
Uh,
those are male as well.
yeah, a couple. She's, I mean, like she's an odd duck. She was walking home from the bus stop from work at about midnight one night, and we live in a not very nice neighborhood, and as she's walking on the sidewalk, these two guys, and they were obviously, sort of half drunk, and they're coming the other way, and it's, hey, good looking, where are you going? We're going to a party, you want to come with us, right? And she says to them, "Oh, no, thanks. I gotta get home. I have things to do. But it was really nice of you to invite me, and it was great to meet you." And then she shakes their hands, right? And then off she goes. And I swear she was probably a block and a half away before they even realized what happened,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
because she's just, it's completely disarming to have a woman who doesn't behave like a woman. Like she's got no fear, right? She's not worried or concerned for her safety. Um, and she's just a genuinely nice person, right? Who is going to be nice to everybody, right? And so she sees a lot of behavior from other women as sort of, she has to think really hard about why they do what they do. And
Hmm.
it's why she's never sort of fit into a, sort of a large group of girls or whatever. Never been in a clique or anything, and she wouldn't want to. It's just too much work trying to figure out what they're all about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can relate. I mean, all that bullshit that you'd have to say deal with in a relationship, it's too much baggage. Why bother? I'm totally on the same page with her on that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and she like, she can understand it, she can figure it out, but sometimes it'll take her an hour and a half of thinking about something to finally figure, oh, that's probably why they were doing that, right? And I think her way of dealing with the world, given all of that, is just always to be a genuinely kind person, right, to everybody that she comes across. And so, and it seems to work very well for her, right? um so there you go.
Hmm. And on that note, it is getting late where I am, and you probably have a million things to do and take care of
Now
your offspring and what have
I
you.
gotta get out of the kids coming in the door any minute, and I gotta get out to the grocery store and buy something for dinner, or we're all gonna go hungry. So
Yeah, in this scarcity society we live in.
yes, yes, there you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here, and I hope for the audience that was enjoyable. Always a nice thing talking to Girl Writes What, who I guess, for lack of a better word, is somewhat of a celebrity in the manosphere.
Oh, stop, you always say that.
Do I? Well, you kind of are. I mean, you kind of are. I'm not doing this from a point of deference. It's just I think you are kind of a celebrity, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know I'm gonna have to come to terms with that at some point,
Well, you
but
should have come to terms with that years ago. I mean, it's been the case for a long time now. No.
it's a weird thing to think about yourself, though.
Uh, yeah, especially when you say, you got to go grocery shopping. Do celebrities even do that? Probably not.
Yeah,
So,
well,
okay,
well,
sorry, you're a pseudo celebrity. There we go.
I'm an introvert too, right? So I
Yeah.
I get along with people, and I just sort of, and I don't have any problems interacting. I'm not socially awkward or anything, but I- it's not something that most introverts set out to do, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
So,
definitely can relate to that. I'm not a huge fan of too much interaction myself, but it's a heavy burden. But yeah, so everyone, thanks for watching. And yeah, check out, obviously, her channel, but she's working on a video, so check that out when it comes out. And I guess if you're willing to sit through it, check out that weird David Pacman dude grilling Karen again. I didn't
oh
enjoy the
yeah,
last
no.
one, but
And anybody who hasn't seen the Jank interview, go look at
yeah,
it,
I got to do that too. Check out the
because
Jeng thing. Yeah.
that was just a freaking travesty. But all you can do is laugh about it, right?
Yeah, I'll force myself to sit through it. I guess that'll be tough, but
Well, for
yeah.
about 20 minutes, he actually let me say quite a bit,
Oh, okay.
and but then I hit some button, and he didn't have anything to come back with. He didn't have a counter argument, so he got all emotional, and then yeah, for he just kind of went kind of a little bit
He's
loopy.
not that bright a guy, Jink, but
Well, he was unprepared too. From what I gather, he'd done a drunk live stream for Super Bowl Sunday the day before,
I see.
and then he was half an hour late to the studio that morning and was probably hungover and unprepared. So I'm willing to give him a little bit of a break on that, on being unprepared with
Yeah.
counter arguments or whatever. So
Okay, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll check you out at a later date.